Reginald Ashworth read the name on the screen one more time, then set his phone face down on the mahogany desk, the way a man sets down a winning hand before anyone else has shown their cards. Ifeoma Clarke, he said it aloud, just to hear how it sounded in an empty room. Flat, ordinary, the kind of name that belonged to a woman who brought coffee to meetings and took notes no one read afterward. He had spent 12 years thinking of her exactly that way, and the habit had become so comfortable that it no longer felt like a choice. It felt like fact. The invitation had been his idea from the beginning. Not the gala itself. The gala was the board's idea, a celebration of Ashworth Capital's 25th anniversary. Black's black tie, 400 guests, the sort of evening where the flower arrangements cost more than most people's monthly rent. But the idea of sending Ifeoma Clarke a seat at table 14, near the back, near the kitchen corridor, near the spot where the waitstaff paused to adjust their trays, that had been Reginald's contribution. A small one. Personal. He wanted her to see what she had missed. His assistant, a young man named Philip who had learned very quickly never to ask follow-up questions, had confirmed the RSVP that morning. She was coming. Reginald had smiled at that in the way he smiled at most things lately. Not with pleasure exactly, but with a deep and satisfied sense of order. Everything in its right place. The woman who had once sat across from him in a basement office in Scarborough, sketching algorithms on napkins, while they both ate sandwiches they could barely afford, would now sit near the kitchen corridor and watch him accept a Lifetime Achievement Award in front of 400 people. He thought of the room, the Fairmont ballroom, the chandeliers, the string quartet, the custom suit hanging in the closet at home with the kind of deliberate elegance that costs money to look effortless. He thought of the speech he had rehearsed, the careful omissions in it, the names he would mention, and the one name he would not. He had not planned to think about her this much, but there was a version of him that understood, in a place he would never examine out loud, that the evening would not feel complete unless she was there to witness it. Ifeoma Clarke received the envelope on a Wednesday, which was the day her executive assistant Mirabelle sorted physical mail at the Clarke Ventures head office on Bay Street. Mirabelle set it on the corner of Ifeoma's desk with the same professional neutrality she applied to everything. But something in the stillness of her posture suggested she had already read the return address. Ifeoma picked it up without sitting down. She was still wearing her coat, having come directly from a presentation to the Pension Fund Committee at Omer's, and she read the invitation standing at the window with the gray October light of Toronto behind her and Lake Ontario a pale line at the edge of the sky. She read it twice, not because she needed to, but because the second time was slower, and she wanted to feel whatever it was going to produce in her chest before she decided what to do about it. What it produced was not anger. That surprised her a little. It was closer to recognition. The particular feeling of seeing something you had known was coming, but hadn't admitted to yourself that you'd been watching for. She set the envelope on the desk beside her laptop, took off her coat, and sat down. "Mirabelle," she said through the open door. "Yes? Do we have anything on the 14th that can't be moved?" A pause, the soft sound of a keyboard. "You have the Series B call with the Vancouver team at 2, and dinner with your sister at 7. Move the call to the morning. Keep the dinner." She looked at the invitation again, and confirmed the Fairmont for the evening. Business attire. Mirabelle appeared in the doorway. She was 61 years old, had worked for Ifeoma for 9 years, and she had the face of a woman who had seen many things and chosen to comment on very few of them. "Yes." Mirabelle looked at her for a moment. "Should I arrange the usual security detail?" Ifeoma considered this. She ran a technology investment firm with holdings in 11 countries. Security details were standard. "Yes," she said. "The full team." She did not explain further, and Mirabelle did not ask. What Reginald Ashworth knew about Ifeoma Clarke could fit neatly into the story he had been telling for 12 years. Which was the version where she had been a junior analyst at his firm, talented in a narrow technical way, prone to overreach, ultimately not a fit for the direction the company was heading. He had let her go in the spring of 2012 with 2 months' severance and a reference letter he had written in 20 minutes. He remembered feeling, at the time, that he was being generous. What Reginald Ashworth did not know, or rather, what he had arranged himself not to know, was considerably more. He did not know that the risk modeling framework Ashworth Capital had used for the better part of a decade had been built in its essential architecture by Ifeoma. In those 2 years, she spent in the Scarborough office, eating sandwiches and filling napkins with numbers. He did not know that 3 of the firm's most profitable early acquisitions had been flagged originally by her analysis, in reports that had been submitted under a shared team byline, where his name appeared first. He did not know that after he let her go, she had spent 6 months consulting independently, 4 months building the first version of what would become Clarke Logic, and 2 years raising seed funding from people who understood what they were looking at, before most people in the Toronto financial corridor had learned to look. He did not know that Clarke Logic, the analytics and AI infrastructure company Ifeoma, had built out of a one-bedroom apartment in Brampton, with her sister watching her daughter on the days she couldn't afford childcare, had gone public 3 years ago at a valuation that made the front page of the Globe and Mail's business section. He did not know that she had been on the cover of Canadian Business the following spring, or that she had been appointed to the Federal Advisory Council on Technology and Innovation the year after that, because he had been in the habit for 12 years of skipping over her name whenever it appeared. The habit had been so complete that when one of his junior partners mentioned Clarke Logic at a board meeting 18 months ago, "Clarke Ventures recently acquired Clarke Logic. Did you see?" Reginald had nodded with the polite vacancy of a man hearing about a company he had no connection to, and moved on. He was not, in any meaningful sense, a stupid man, but there are things a person can choose not to see for long enough that the choice calcifies into something that feels like innocence. Ifeoma did not spend much time thinking about Reginald Ashworth in those 12 years, which was less a statement of grace than a statement of practicality. She had too many actual problems to carry fictional ones. When she was building Clarke Logic in the Brampton apartment, she thought about payroll. When she was negotiating the Series A, she thought about term sheets. When her daughter Ada Ora was sick in the 4th year, and the medical bills arrived at the same time as a vendor dispute that threatened the company's 3rd largest contract, she thought about neither of those things in the order they deserved, and somehow held all of it at once, which was the particular skill set that no business school had ever managed to formalize into a curriculum. She thought about Reginald Ashworth on exactly 3 occasions in 12 years. Once, in the first month after he let her go, when she was angry enough that she wrote 4 paragraphs in a notebook about everything she would have said to him if she had said it. She read those paragraphs 3 days later and threw the notebook in the recycling bin, not because she had forgiven him, but because she could see that the anger was costing her something she couldn't afford to spend. Once, when Clarke Logic closed its Series B and one of the investors, a woman named Georgette, who had made her money in real estate and had opinions about everything, said, "You know, you remind me of someone. You have this quality of knowing what you know before anyone else knows it matters." And Ifeoma had thought, yes, I learned that in a basement in Scarborough, and the person who benefited most from it told me I was not a fit for the direction the company was heading. And once, when the invitation arrived, she sat with it for 2 evenings before she decided to go, and the decision, when it came, was not about him at all. She was going because 400 people would be in that room, and a number of them were people she did business with, or hoped to do business with, and the Fairmont Ballroom was simply a place where things happened, and she had learned a long time ago that the only way to make sure you were part of what happened was to be in the room. She also thought, privately, that it might be interesting. The 14th was a clear night, cold the way Toronto in October is cold. Not brutal yet, but honest about where things were going. The Fairmont was lit the way the Fairmont is always lit for these occasions, warm and certain of itself, the kind of building that expects to be photographed. The woman in the deep burgundy gown, who stepped out of the black Suburban at the front entrance, was not wearing the gown for Reginald Ashworth. She had bought it 3 months earlier for a different function, and had chosen it tonight because it was the right dress for the room, and she knew the room. Behind her, 2 members of her security detail, the woman in the charcoal blazer and the man in the fitted gray suit, stepped out with the unhurried precision of people who did this regularly. A third remained with the vehicles. The doorman held the door. The woman in the charcoal blazer held the space. Inside, the event was already in motion, that specific hum of 400 people arranged around rounds of 10. The chandeliers doing their work. The string quartet near the entrance playing something from the last century that sounded expensive. Ifeoma gave her name to the registration table, received her table card, 14, as expected, near the kitchen corridor, and did not change her expression. She found her seat, exchanged greetings with the couple beside her, a man in resort wear who was clearly uncomfortable and his partner who was making the best of it, and accepted a glass of water from a passing waiter. She did not scan the room for Reginald. She did not need to. He found her first, which was what she had expected. He came across the room with the particular walk of a man who has arranged his face into graciousness, but whose eyes are doing something else entirely. He was wearing a very good suit. She noticed this with the same neutrality she noticed the chandeliers. Ifeoma. He extended his hand. "I'm glad you could make it." "Reginald." She shook it. "Congratulations on 25 years. There was a half second in which he reassessed something, and she saw it happen. She had been in enough negotiations to recognize the moment when someone realizes the room they have entered is not the room they had prepared for. "Table 14, treating you well?" he asked, and the question had a texture to it. A small, careful pressure designed to land somewhere. "It's a fine table," she said. "Good sightlines to the stage." He laughed, which was the social move available to him. "Always the analyst." He said it with the warmth of a man who means to be condescending but wants credit for the warmth. "Still at it? I heard you moved into investments." Ifeoma looked at him for a moment. "Not long." "Something like that," she said. Someone across the room called his name, and he excused himself with another manufactured smile, and she watched him go, with the same calm attention she brought to quarterly earnings calls. It happened during the cocktail reception, before dinner, while the string quartet was taking a break, and the room was doing what rooms do when the music stops. Redistributing, reconnecting, the specific geometry of people who have had 2 drinks and are deciding who to talk to next. A woman in a cream blazer made her way toward Ifeoma's table. She was perhaps 55, with the focused walk of someone who had been looking for a specific person and had finally located her. She introduced herself as the managing director of a pension infrastructure fund based in Calgary, and her handshake was the kind that meant she had been underestimated enough times that she no longer announced herself. She simply arrived. "You're Ifeoma Clarke," the woman said. "Clarke Logic, Clarke Ventures now," Ifeoma said. "Clarke Logic is one of the holdings." "I know what it is." The woman smiled with genuine pleasure. "We've been watching your infrastructure division for 8 months. I was hoping I'd run into you at something before the conference in February." They talked for 11 minutes, which was enough time for Ifeoma to understand that this was a serious conversation being conducted in the middle of a cocktail party, which was the kind of conversation she had learned to recognize and take seriously. They exchanged information with the economical brevity of people who had both attended enough events to know the difference between a useful introduction and a social obligation. After the woman in the cream blazer left, a man materialized on the other side. The kind of man who moves through rooms like water, unhurried and inevitable, who turned out to be a senior partner at a Toronto infrastructure firm whose name Ifeoma knew, and whose recent activity in clean energy investments she knew in more detail than he probably expected. They talked for 9 minutes. By the time the bell rang for dinner seating, Ifeoma had spoken substantively with 7 people, three of whom she had wanted to meet for some time, and two of whom she had not known she wanted to meet until she was already in the conversation. She found her seat at table 14. The program moved the way these programs move. Remarks from the board chair, a video retrospective that was 4 minutes longer than it needed to be. Dinner served in the interval between speeches. Reginald Ashworth sat at the head table with his wife and the firm's senior partners, and from that distance he had the look of a man inside his own best story, the chandelier light falling on him at the right angle. The awards portion came after the main course. The MC, a broadcaster Ifeoma, recognized from CBC, introduced the segment with practiced warmth, and the first two awards were for partners who received them with the brief, modest speeches of people who had been briefed to be brief. Then came the Lifetime Achievement recognition, and the MC used the word visionary 3 times in 90 seconds, which was one of those words that had been repeated so many times it had lost its weight, though the audience still responded to it the way audiences respond to familiar music. Not because they're listening, but because it sounds like something they recognize. Reginald walked to the stage to sustained applause, adjusted the microphone with a small practiced gesture, and began. He spoke about the early years of the firm, with the fluency of someone who had told this story many times. He spoke about risk, about conviction, about the particular kind of faith required to build something from nothing. He mentioned his wife, who inclined her head at the head table. He mentioned 3 partners by name. He mentioned a mentor from his MBA program. He paused twice for effect, and both pauses landed where he intended them to land, because he was genuinely good at this, at rooms, at the controlled release of sincerity. He did not mention Ifeoma Clarke. He did not mention the risk modeling framework, or the Scarborough office, or the napkins, or the 3 acquisitions. He did not mention any of it, because in the story he had told for 12 years, these things had been absorbed so completely into the background that they no longer existed as things that had happened. They were simply the weather of an earlier time. He ended with something about the next 25 years, received the award with both hands, held it up briefly for the cameras, and returned to his seat to a second wave of applause. At table 14, the man in the resort wear leaned toward his partner and said something she answered with a small shake of her head. Ifeoma looked at the stage, then at her water glass, then at the far end of the room where a set of floor-to-ceiling windows showed the dark of the city outside. She was not surprised. She had not come here expecting to hear her name. That was not what the evening was for. The thing that happened next was not something she had arranged, which was perhaps why it felt afterward like the thing the evening had actually been about. During the dessert course, a man 3 tables away stood up to take a call, and in the particular acoustic quiet that follows a round of applause, spoke loudly enough into his phone that several nearby tables could hear fragments. The announcement was this afternoon. Yes, confirmed. The Clarke Ventures AI infrastructure deal. The federal contract. Before he caught himself and moved toward the corridor. It was not coordinated. It was simply the way information moves in a room full of people who pay attention to the same industries. Within 4 minutes, the woman in the cream blazer had crossed the room again and crouched briefly beside Ifeoma's chair to say, very quietly, that she had just heard and that she hoped the conversation they'd started would continue sooner rather than later. The infrastructure partner found a reason to pass by. The board chair of a financial technology consortium, Ifeoma, had been watching for 2 quarters, stopped at table 14 in a way that required an introduction, and the introduction required a handshake, and the handshake required a brief explanation of what Clarke Ventures' AI infrastructure division actually did, which Ifeoma gave in the compact, precise language of someone who had given it many times and still meant it. From the head table, Reginald Ashworth watched this, without fully understanding what he was watching. He saw a woman at table 14 who seemed to have become, in the space of a dinner, a point around which the room was reorganizing. He saw the woman in the cream blazer. He saw Desmond Fry, who ran the infrastructure consortium, standing at table 14, with the attentive posture of a man who has found something worth paying attention to. He saw two people he recognized from the advisory corridors of the federal government. He felt, for the first time that evening, the specific discomfort of a man who has carefully arranged a room and then noticed that something in the arrangement has shifted in a way he cannot account for. He did not connect it to Ifeoma Clarke specifically. Not yet. His mind moved around the edges of recognition and did not quite arrive. After the formal program ended and the room loosened into the particular mixture of relief and continuation that follows structured events, Ifeoma found herself in conversation near the windows with a woman she had met twice before at different functions, a technology policy advisor named Celestine who worked for a provincial ministry and who had the rare quality of listening to what was actually said rather than to the space where her own next point was forming. "I heard about the federal contract," Celestine said without preamble. The announcement came out around 5. "It's a significant mandate." "It is," Ifeoma said. "You built the infrastructure proposal in-house?" "Mostly. We had outside counsel for the regulatory sections." Celestine considered this. "You know," she said, "I was in this building 8 years ago for a different event, and someone told me about a new analytics company out of Brampton that was doing interesting work with predictive modeling. I looked it up and couldn't find very much. Then I couldn't stop finding it." Ifeoma smiled. It was a real smile, the kind that came without warning from something she hadn't expected to feel. "That's usually how it goes," she said. "I imagine it is." Celestine looked around the room for a moment, then back. "Can I ask you something direct?" "Yes. Why are you at table 14? The question landed quietly. Ifeoma looked at the woman beside her, 60 or near it, the face of someone who had worked in rooms like this long enough to understand their arrangements. "Because that's where I was put," Ifeoma said. Celestine nodded slowly, and Ifeoma was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the city was doing what it always did. Lit, moving, indifferent to the specific human dramas transpiring inside the buildings it surrounded. Lake Ontario was invisible now, absorbed into the dark. "And table 14 turned out to be fine," she said. Reginald found her near the coat check, near the end of the evening, in that specific transitional space where an event dissolves back into ordinary time. He had spent the last 40 minutes asking careful questions of people he trusted, and what he had assembled from their answers had produced in him a quality of feeling he was not yet ready to name. Ifeoma. He said her name differently this time. The performing graciousness texture was gone. She turned from the coat check attendant with her claim ticket in her hand. "Your company," he started. "Clarke Logic, Clarke Ventures," he paused. "The federal contract tonight. Clarke Ventures AI infrastructure," she said. "Yes." He looked at her. He had very much the face of a man who has come to the edge of a sentence he has never had to say before and is discovering in real time that he doesn't have the words for it yet. "You built all of that." "Yes. After, she said, evenly. Neither sharp nor soft. The coat check attendant returned her coat. The woman in the charcoal blazer appeared with the smooth timing of someone who had been watching the room and had made a judgment. Ifeoma put on her coat without haste. "Reginald," she said, "it was a beautiful evening. Congratulations again on 25 years. She said it without irony and without particular warmth, in the tone of a woman who has simply said the accurate thing. She walked toward the entrance. The woman in the charcoal blazer and the man in the fitted gray suit fell into position, unhurried, the way professionals do when they are doing exactly what they are there to do. At the door, Ifeoma paused for a moment, not for him, not for the room, not for any of it, but in the way a person pauses at the end of something that has been held in the body for a long time. The kind of pause that is not dramatic because it doesn't need to be. Then she walked through the door, and the city received her, indifferent and enormous and entirely hers to move through. Behind her, in the warm and certain light of the Fairmont ballroom, Reginald Ashworth stood at the coat check, holding an award that had his name on it and trying to remember, with increasing difficulty, the order in which things had actually happened.